So this is the 2:30 turn, starting with the Confederates. Polk of the First Corps finally implements his orders. So the First Corps is supposed to be attacking the Union position in Crescent Field. That's not shown in the picture here. But he'll be facing McClernand's division, and it remains to be seen who's weaker, McClernand or Polk. In this picture, which is set in the future, this is a 3 o'clock picture, but you can see Breckinridge attacking Cloud Field. But because he is going to be flanked, he's going to give attention to his flank. On the western side of Wicker Field, which you can see in the picture, of course this again is future, the Kentucky Brigade advances against 81st Ohio. Bowen's brigade pivots and extends line to protect the eastern flank. However, Morton evaporates. Compton's unit is shaken. And then near Crescent Field, which again you can't see in this picture, Russell and Stewart's brigades advance, running into defensive fire. And Russell's extended line becomes shaken, and the brigade is hit by the Union 1st Artillery. This wrecks Russell's brigade. It becomes shaken and falls back. Then we go to the Union portion of the 2:30 turn. So the Union General McClernand passes his corps stoppage check. He continues to attack despite having 3 wrecked brigades. General Grant's probably going to reward him for this in some way. William Wallace resumes his attack against Breckinridge in the Wicker Field. That is depicted in this picture. However, Lew Wallace is still sitting on his orders. You can see in the very bottom of the picture, General Nelson is getting into the Confederate Reserve Division's eastern flank with 2 brigades. Colonel Bruce, you can see there on the southern end. And he ends up extending lines while Amen covers the northern end. Hazen is held back in reserve. You can see him in reserve there. And McCook's division, which is in the slightly darker blue, enters the fray. And Colonel Rousseau, you can see the 4A2 brigade makes contact with Bowen. So General Breckinridge orders defensive fire here, but there are so many enemy targets to pick from. So Bruce's brigade suffers some losses, but he holds on to his morale. Rousseau's brigade, the 4A2, which is seen in the picture, becomes shaken. And then Colonel Bruce and his extended lines strike into Bowen's extended lines, and this flank attack results in Bowen's brigade becoming wrecked, and his extended line becomes shaken and falls back. Amen and Rousseau attack the main part of the brigade, and it suffers further losses. Meanwhile, at the western end of Wicker Field, the Kentucky Brigade is engaged in crossfire with Compton, and Compton suffers some straggler losses and becomes wrecked, and Compton is shaken. The Kentucky Brigade, however, becomes bloodlusted. At Crescent Field, not depicted in this picture, McClernand attempts to put together an attack with the wrecked 1st Division because he's still under attack orders. Marsh and Wraith advance into Clark's division on the southern end of the field, and as a result, Wraith's brigade absorbs heavy losses from defensive fire. Marsh's brigade is also hit. It becomes shaken. It falls back. However, in the offensive part of the fire, Wraith attacks Stewart's brigade, but it holds its ground. And that brings the 2:30 turn to a close. We're now going to go to the 3 o'clock turn. The picture that I've been showing is actually a 3 o'clock turn picture that depicts some of the geographics. But at 3 o'clock, Breckinridge and Polk pass their core stoppage checks and they continue their attacks on the Union flanks. So on the western side, Stewart and Russell advance into Crescent Field. That is not depicted in this picture, but it does draw some fire from Wraith and Marsh's brigades, and Clark's replacement is wounded in the fight. So I don't know what that means, but maybe Russell is now promoted to be the division commander. The Union artillery fires back at Russell's brigade, and that unit suffers some losses. It's shaken and it falls back. Stewart's men also attack Marsh and Wraith's brigades on the edge of the field, and Marsh becomes shaken. Wraith becomes disorganized and has to retreat 2 hexes. At Wicker Field, which is depicted in this picture, Breckinridge's men resume their attack, but first they're going to face down some significant defensive fire from Amen and Rousseau. They both fire on Bowen's brigade. It becomes shaken and has to fall back. Compton's brigade also fires on the Kentucky brigade, and it ends up losing its bloodlust marker. So in the Union part of the turn, General McClernand fails his stoppage. He's seen enough. He calls off the attack at Crescent Field. Likewise, General William Wallace fails his stoppage check. He stops his division's attack at Wicker Field. But Nelson and McCook are continuing their attacks, and because they're relatively fresh, and they hit the Confederate Reserve Division's flank. So as a result of the command phase, the McClernand's division falls back to the northern side of the Crescent Field. It's not in this picture. Wallace falls back to the northern end of Cloud Field. That is in the picture, and you can see where he's fallen back right in front of his artillery. However, Nelson and McCook are resuming their attack on the Confederate right, and you can see Bruce's brigade runs into enemy fire at Wicker Field from Bowen's brigade and the Confederate artillery. So Bruce suffers some losses, but he passes his morale check. Bowen fires defensively at Rousseau, and he's set to hit Breckinridge and Stratham in the flank, but that fire has no effect. Then Amen and Rousseau strike back at the rebels in the flank, and Stratham suffers some heavy losses in this. He becomes disorganized and has to retreat. General Breckinridge has to take a casualty check, and he does pass, so he escapes alive from this. Bruce's brigade attacks Bowen's brigade, and the rebels suffer some severe losses, and Bowen's brigade ends up routing, and the artillery is forced to limber and pull away, and 1 gun point is lost during the retreat. And so 1 gun point in this game represents about 3 cannon. So these are left behind in the haste of the rout. But that brings the 3 o'clock turn to a close. Thanks for watching, and stay tuned if you would like to see what happens at 3:30. Have a great day.
Trucking, got my chips cashed in, keep trucking.